Thank you, Jillian, and good morning to those of you in the U.S. and good afternoon to those of you in Europe, and welcome. We're very pleased to present our webinar today on doing business with Microsoft. Just going very quickly to the agenda for today. We'll do very quick introductions. The whole webinar should take a little bit under an hour, and we have allowed some time for questions at the end. So very quick introductions of the speakers. We'll give you a very quick overview of ISG, and then we'll get right into what is the overall market that Microsoft is currently doing business in. What are some of the nuances of doing business with Microsoft? We'll walk through some actual case studies that will illustrate the types of results that can be achieved in a Microsoft negotiation. We'll then walk through the recommended approach that we take in working with Microsoft and feel that it would work well for you as well, and then allowing some time at the end for some questions and next steps. So very quickly, my name is Bill Huber. I am the Global Partner for Software Advisory. So ISG delivers software advisory services across most of the world, primarily in the US, Europe, and Australia, but to a lesser degree in Latin America and other places as well, in Asia. I've been with ISG for about 13 years now and have been in a variety of roles, and prior to joining the firm was actually a procurement guy, was Chief Procurement Officer at Wachovia and headed IT sourcing at American Express and had a variety of similar roles. With me on today's call, Louis Pellegrino. Louis joined ISG about I think 5 or 6 years ago now, and was previously a director at Microsoft, where he had about a 21-year career in the licensing desk and as well in their consulting services, and really was one of the folks who architected a lot of Microsoft's overall pricing strategies and contracting strategies at that time. Also on the call today is Ann Wynn. Ann is a principal consultant in our Microsoft practice and recently joined ISG after a very successful career both in corporate life as an IT sourcing specialist and most recently with Accenture. So we're very pleased to have you with us today. Very quickly, for those of you unfamiliar with ISG, ISG is a leading global research and advisory firm. We have about 1,300 associates globally. About half of our business is Americas based, half of it rest of the world. We serve over 40 countries. We have about 21 locations worldwide, and most of our business comes from referral. So we have a 95% recommendation rate. We were the first major company to get into IT transaction advisory. And as of this date, we've advised on nearly $500 billion in IT sourcing transactions and bring very positive savings and ROI to our clients. So we'd love the opportunity for those of you who have not worked with us previously to get to know you and perhaps to offer some good benefits to you as well, and to help you to drive better outcomes in some of your technology sourcing and technology transformation work. In the software advisory realm, most of our focus is on the top tier software publishers. So if you see the slide in front of you, you can see Microsoft, Oracle, Cisco, ServiceNow, VMware, SAP, Salesforce, IBM, and so on. Today's webinar is the third of 4 webinars that we are doing in the first part of 2020. And for those of you who missed them, we can provide you with a link to our Oracle and to our SAP S/4HANA webinars, and we also have an upcoming webinar next week on software asset management and audit defense. The last thing I'll point out on this slide is you can see the actual savings ranges that ISG has brought to our clients on engagements for each of these particular independent software vendors. All right, so thank you for bearing with me for the introduction. It's now my pleasure to turn over to Louis.
Thank you, Bill, and good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's discussion. As Bill said, my name is Louis Pellegrino, and by way of background, I did spend quite a number of years with Microsoft, both in the consulting services capacity and with their licensing and pricing division, which is the work center that creates all of the commercial licensing instruments that volume licensing is transacted across. What I wanted to do is just kind of give A brief introduction. One of the things that is critically important when helping customers transact business with Microsoft is to ensure a rich understanding of the organization itself. What is its go-to-market strategy? What are the highlights? What are the lowlights? And be able to understand and weave those insights into your overall presentation to Microsoft. So by way of introduction, Microsoft, if you're dealing with them at enterprise scale, they're obviously a very significant partner. And over the last 20 years, doing business with them has become increasingly challenging. At the beginning of the 2000s, Microsoft basically fundamentally changed itself from a transaction-oriented seller of software into an annuity seller and introduced the enterprise agreement. The enterprise agreement was a way for organizations to actually simplify and acquire hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of software and software offerings that are now pretty much common in today's marketplace. And when I joined the company back in 1994, I thought it was a big company then. It was 20,000 employees, $4 billion of revenue. But through June of last year, which was their last fiscal year, the company obviously has grown to better than $126 billion a year. Direct employees totaling 145,000, and net, countless other hundreds of thousands of folks who work indirectly supporting the worldwide partner ecosystem for Microsoft. Now, over the last 10 years, Microsoft has fundamentally changed its business, moving from a finished goods provider to a hoster of IT services. And in the course of doing that, there have been literally hundreds of changes that have taken place across the end user and data center products that they bring to market. These changes all are coming at a very rapid velocity, and many enterprise sourcing teams struggle to really keep on top of the changes at the pace that they're coming. So this webinar then is intended to continue with making sure that you have a comfort level with respect to the profile of Microsoft as it exists today in 2020 and the business agenda that it pursues with its customers. The next logical question is why should you be interested in this seminar? Well, simply put, for most enterprises, the cost of doing business with Microsoft is increasing and is steadily increasing. Microsoft has really reshaped its business. They have multiple cloud service offerings. They kind of take the form of Office 365, Azure, Dynamics 365. And Microsoft is using its online services portfolio to really work their way into a number of different agendas that have not necessarily been their strong suit. Where productivity has been sort of the anchor technology category, now they're using security services and creating certain bundles to help advance that agenda. They are very aggressive in working with their enterprise clients to try to get you into these services with the hope of establishing a dependency on those services as time moves on. If you're already in Office 365 and you're at your first renewal, you may have already been sort of surprised by the size of the renewal spend. Just simply to retain services in the same status that they were 3 years ago, most customers are seeing their prices go up in a pretty material way. I look at this graphic. This is a graphic which I have actually called my three-cloud Monty. This is Microsoft's new business. It really is anchored by Office 365. Most customers have a footprint in Office 365. Many other customers have their footprint in one of the other two clouds, whether it be Azure or Dynamics. However, only a few really have their they tiptoed into all three clouds. But there's no mistaking the fact that Microsoft is using its dominance with Microsoft 365 and Office 365 brands to get people into one or the other or both of the other clouds. And so what I'd like to do right now is just take a quick poll to see exactly what the status is of our attendees today, whether or not you are in one or more clouds. And so, Jillian, would you mind putting up the poll? And we'll take about 20 to 30 seconds to execute the poll.
You bet, Louis. Thank you. I am sending the first survey to the audience now, and you will hear an audible alert on your computer as soon as that pops up. And as Louis said, we'll give you about 20, 30 seconds to answer. Our first question is, what is your current Microsoft Cloud enrollment status?
Okay, I think the inputs are tabulating, and it looks like it pretty much ties out with what our observations have been in the marketplace, is that Office 365 is kind of the anchor cloud, and the second most popular cloud for enterprise customers to be participating in appears to be the Azure. We've also got some people, actually a little bit more than I thought, approaching 25% of the today's attendees actually have presence in all three clouds. So with that, we can go ahead and just move forward. Thank you for your input. This helps greatly with respect to sort of how to couch the rest of the points that I'd like to make with you. In terms of Microsoft's business model, they really, as a publisher and a hoster of services, they have three distinct businesses. They have an intelligent cloud business, which, as the namesake implies, is where Azure, that platform where the dev tools exist to make applications come to life on that, and where Windows Server provides the underlying compute. Additionally, they have the anchor products that are in productivity and business, which is where your document and user collaboration between Office 365 and Microsoft Teams exist. And then elsewhere with Dynamics, you have really their CRM and ERP offerings. That kind of rounds out the commercial segment. They also have a very robust consumer segment as well, in which, you know, traditional Windows client, hardware technology through Microsoft Surface, virtual reality, gaming, and of course search. That rounds out the three different businesses that Microsoft is actually active in. Those businesses decompose into a lot of different categories of software. Obviously, I won't read through all of these here, but it's virtually impossible for any enterprise today to be running completely independent of Microsoft. You may not be using everything that Microsoft puts out there, but I'm almost certain that you're using some or more of these product technologies in the various categories that they actually compete in. And speaking of competition, because they are scattered across so many different elements of IT, Microsoft runs into quite a number of competitors out there in the marketplace. And the competitors are actually aligned with the three businesses that we just spoke about. In the productivity and business, you can see the list of folks that they compete with: traditional vendors like Apple, ERP vendors like Sage Group and Infor, and the like. And in cloud, big area of competition with both hosters as well as management providers. And then in the more personal computing, typically titles that you see associated with the consumer and gaming industry. I wanted to take a quick moment to just do a look back to assess how Microsoft has actually performed in one of the AAS marketplaces, specifically the infrastructure as a service marketplace. This is a snapshot from 2016, and there we have sort of the competitive landscape with Amazon, Alibaba, Google, Rackspace, and others, and it's clear at this point in time that Amazon is just head and shoulders above the rest of its competition at 44%, the second closest with Microsoft, and then really everybody else coalescing in the all others group. Fast forward 2 years and see how this changes. Well, Amazon has been able to sort of hold its own. It's actually bubbled up a couple of points, but Microsoft has effectively doubled. Google has near doubled. Alibaba has doubled, and IBM has increased. And so what's happening is the market is shaking out. A lot of the others are sort of, you know, the share is coming out of the all others category and moving into these top tier hosted providers. So it is evidence that Microsoft is fully in and fully engaged in this area. But IaaS is just but one service that's coming from these various providers. You also have software as a service, platform as a service, and business process as a service. And we are looking at the forecast here across 3 different years, the bottom bar being the current year, middle bar being next year, and the top bar being out in 2022, and the forecasted revenue amounts from each of those. I'm highlighting here the 2 that Microsoft is most keenly focused on. Certainly software as a service with all of the hosted products that they already have that are just ready, end user ready, and then platform as a service, which is a point of differentiation that they've made all along, that they really are the unique hybrid, all-in, or any combination of this distribution that you'd like. So this is where Microsoft is really going to spend the majority of its research and investment. And in doing so, they've actually cultivated a very healthy business. 2019 was a stellar year by any measure. If you're a Microsoft stockholder, you saw your price increase. As of June 30 last year, it was $134. It's gone up 30% since then. So obviously, anyone who's holding Microsoft stock is pretty happy. Income is great. They're starting to report on the various cloud initiatives and showing where that revenue is coming from. So any way you slice and dice it, Microsoft is running a very healthy business at this moment. And so for the balance of this fiscal year, really what they're looking at is they're looking at taking this sort of good sort of position that they have and optimizing it with going big with Azure. It used to be that customers would see proposals for Azure in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of committed spend that the Microsoft is looking for. That's now into the tens of millions of dollars. They're routinely proposing Azure commitment levels at that spend. They're also now, this is an important year with respect to a couple of end user technologies, namely Office and Windows, as dated versions of those products will run into challenges trying to log in and interact with the Office 365 service. So customers who are running Windows 7 or Office 2013 or even downgraded versions of Windows 10, we may begin to see some challenges as they try to log into the service. Also, Microsoft is trying to take the Windows franchise and the hardware franchise and continue to extend it so that it becomes more versatile with respect to the forms of input that it can take. And recently, Microsoft announced it's coming back into the phone market. Actually, having left the phone market, it's coming back in, but with a hardware play, actually with the Surface Duo, which will be an Android-based device. And Microsoft is just looking to capture the screens. Whatever screen that you are actually interacting with, Microsoft wants to have a role in that screen. When doing a SWOT analysis, and these are things that we want to update each and every year, Microsoft certainly has some very obvious strengths with brand image, developer ecosystem, and the like. They also have some significant threats on the other end. Cybercrime continues to become, I say, concern for most InfoSec people. With Windows 7, going end of life, that's another area of potential exposure for not necessarily Microsoft, but for Microsoft's customers, and a variety of other sort of opportunities and weaknesses. One of the weaknesses being that they're making a lot of money, but they also have some significant debt that they have to process and service over time. So this becomes sort of the short list of things, and this is a very short list. It's obviously not all-inclusive, but the things that keep Microsoft executives up at night. First and foremost is how to keep pace and compete with Amazon in order to grow their market share. This is a very important thing for them, even though they intend to compete aggressively in software as a service and platform as a service. They cannot let Amazon continue to grow in the infrastructure space. Bing has been somewhat underwhelming. They've obviously tried every which way with Sunday to help Bing become a more competitive search engine, but it still is something that is lacking in the market and not meeting expectations. We have a number of things going on across the globe. Even before the current virus scare, there were already signs of a cooling and a softening of demand for some of the higher online services. Microsoft will have to continue to innovate. And with respect to the offerings that make up the Office 365 cloud, they're doing so today by creating different bundles and adding new security and management products and services to those bundles. But this is a marketplace that could in fact reach saturation at some point. They've got a lot of that debt that they are servicing really is the result of some of the acquisitions that they've made. So they're really looking to fully integrate, monetize, and generate the return on investment from those acquisitions. The game business, the consumer business, is not as robust as it was, even a couple of years ago. So there's some softening in that. Microsoft has transitioned many of its enterprise customers away from what was a comfortable premier support model, and now is introducing what's called unified support, which is effectively a tax because now you pay Microsoft a support fee, which is derived as a percentage of your overall spend. And of course, there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of products that are reaching end of life. Many customers still have challenges in eradicating those from their ecosystem. So Microsoft is making a number of end of life support options available to them, but still, there's only a matter of time before some customer runs into a problem as a result of using an unsupported product that Microsoft probably won't be able to completely extricate itself from. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to run one more quick poll, and this is about whether or not your organization is in sort of is scheduled to be active with a renewal with Microsoft over the next year or so. So this will just take we'll just dedicate another 10 to 20 seconds, or no, 20 to 30 seconds to answer the survey and let us know how soon you'll be having to deal with the Microsoft renewal phenomena.
Thanks, Louis. Everyone should see that on their screen now. We'll give you just a few seconds to answer, then I'll send the results to everyone so we're on the same page.
Okay. So it looks like about half of the attendees will have the fortunate opportunity to work with Microsoft here in 2020 or early 2021 to update their Microsoft Enterprise Agreement. We really advise organizations to not underestimate the effort it takes to have a comprehensive renegotiation with Microsoft and the preparation and planning around getting ready for this, because it is not a trivial event. And if you're an organization that's better than 10,000 users, it is obviously a very expensive renewal in most cases. So with that, I will now turn the next section of the conversation over to my colleague, Ann Wynn, who will talk a little bit about some of the interesting nuances of doing business with Microsoft. Ann?
Thanks, Louis. Hi, this is Ann Wynn, and I've recently joined ISG as a principal consultant. I'm with a 7-year tenure at Accenture, being a software advisor, and I've held several sourcing leadership positions in private industry. I'd like to review some of the nuances of doing business with Microsoft. Microsoft is a different company from even a few years ago. It has transformed itself into a major cloud service provider. Your Microsoft account team is often charged with increasing revenue by double-digit percentages, both at agreement renewal and during the term. This is often accomplished through upselling or overselling their products and services. Compliance revenue is standard, and you may expect Microsoft to offer a software asset management review or even an audit to ensure compliance. They are pressuring their customers using on-premise products with software assurance to move to their cloud service with the goal of retiring SA entirely. The traditional discounts that in past agreement renewals were offered on SA are no longer being provided unless there is a substantial commitment to their cloud service offerings, in particular, Office 365, Microsoft Dynamics 365, and Microsoft Azure. New user subscriptions have been added to Office 365 that are twice the cost of their initial subscription with no added functional value. Regarding Premier support, customers will be moving to a new unified support, which will be priced relative to your annual spend. This model combines the support of software and the increasing spend on subscriptions. It can be 10 to 12% of your total spend. It is important to pay equal attention to other non-pricing components of the deal structure in order to achieve beneficial discounts, including demand management, profiling of employees, and how best to align products to your business needs. Online service renewals are seeing price increases of 20 to 40%. This is illustrative of how Microsoft is pushing its customers from on-premise software to a hybrid environment using Azure for their cloud services. From then, it is the migration to full online workloads using SQL, Windows VMs, and Microsoft 365. The goal is to limit or even end the availability of on-premise exclusive software options. Azure is used to migrate on-premise Active Directory, infrastructure, and SQL to a hosted environment, providing a common identity, integrated management and security, and a consistent data platform. Azure Stack is a hybrid platform that lets you deliver Azure services from your data center. It combines infrastructure as a service and platform as a service in a software stack that spans the data center environment as well as Microsoft Azure Cloud. The hybrid design is a success because Microsoft realized that it could not be an all or nothing scenario. They recognize that some businesses cannot migrate completely to the cloud, and Azure Stack is the result of that. There could be specific needs, such as complying with government security regulations that require it. This shows the unbundled M365 product, which Microsoft is heavily pushing. It includes Windows 10, Enterprise Mobility and Security, Office 365, plus add-ons. You can see how these are spread throughout the different suites with the color coding in the lower right. There are 3 plans, F1, E3, and E5, with E5 being their premium product. The items on the left are those of E3, and E5 contains those plus the items on the right. You can see that M365 is complex by design, and there may be some functionality that your organization may not use. A careful analysis of your business and workforce should be done in order to purchase these products with the greatest value. We have created personas with attributes tied to their role and responsibility. For example, an executive decision maker might need the premium E5 for security and compliance, and a frontline worker might need the F1 for only email and limited access and mobility support. With the release of SQL Server 2012, this licensing changed from processor sockets to cores. This provides users the option of running it in their data center or third party. License mobility allows users to redeploy what were initially on-premise licenses to a third party. With the release of Windows Server 2016, this same processor to core licensing was adopted. Windows Server cores covered by software assurance now have hybrid use rights. If you have an upcoming renewal, it is likely that this calculation for processor to core conversion, namely 8 cores to each CPU, will need to be done. You need to do an inventory at a machine level to determine the number of cores needed and make sure it is sufficient to cover your needs. You will need to provide a like-to-like number to Microsoft in order to be compliant. This illustrates how you can use the value locked into your existing enterprise agreement that can be extended to Azure. For Windows Standard, use the Windows Server license on-premise or Azure. The rights for Data Center are used on-premise and Azure and are additive. Data Center is being pushed by moving Standard to Data Center in the cloud. But you may not have a business need to do that, and you need to run it in your own data center. And now I'm going to hand it back to Bill.
Thank you very much, Ann. So we'd like to quickly walk you through 3 case studies. The first is a very large American bank, and like many banks, this bank had a very conservative culture. They had a high degree of concern around account security, around privacy, and around migrating too quickly to a fully online scenario. So in this circumstance, we really had to work with them with the constraints, both with their culture and their regulatory environment, to help them to navigate what was the right structure and right approach with Microsoft to get them the best possible financial value while taking them on the journey that they were capable of moving on. When we worked with them, we focused on their traditional productivity workloads. We worked with them in terms of how to manage their business as usual posture while moving towards that future environment, and worked with them finally to get them to kind of a third option between where they were and where Microsoft was. The baseline that we developed for Office 365 provided the client with the comfort of a known platform, which gave them the basis for addressing their future changes that they were going to have to adopt as Microsoft continued migrating to the future. As a result of the work that we did with them, we were able to secure a significant savings. We were able to lock them in with a balance of both their BAU environment as well as protecting them and giving them price protection as well as a baseline for future changes in their contracting. Gave them better terms across the board and other key customizations that Microsoft is willing to agree with. And the result was a 3-year contract, and as mentioned, material savings, even given a very conservative starting point and environment with which to work. The second case study we'd like to walk you through is for a very large global logistics firm. And in this case, they were up for a major renewal. Their current renewal discussion at that time had again been focused on transformation from a traditional Microsoft on-premise model to moving workloads to Microsoft's O365 services. However, in this case, we found that Microsoft was very much driving the dialogue, driving the agenda, and our client was very much in a reaction mode in terms of the negotiation. So the approach that we took there was first of all, from a purely tactical standpoint, we simply benchmarked the current pricing offers on the table that Microsoft was providing and identified the gaps there. But secondly, and equally importantly, or even perhaps more importantly, we really looked at the timing in terms of the client purchasing their cloud workloads not ahead of their actual requirement, but when they actually were going to have those requirements to move to that workload, so that there was not a buy before you try scenario, but rather buy at the time that you're actually going to use it. We then worked with them in terms of optimizing all of their bill of materials, working for each of the user profiles to help refine those, and doing an aggressive negotiation. End result was a 3-year agreement that literally brought tens of millions of dollars of savings and a 46% overall savings to this client. The third and last case study that we'll walk you through is again, a major well-known company that was in the healthcare life science industry and actually went through a significant merger in the prior few years. So in this case, we were working with 2 very disparate legacy environments and very disparate legacy cultures. And working with them, we had to take a lot of time to help them think through, again, their user profiles, their demand usage. There were a lot of uncertainties because of all the turbulence that's normally created in an M&A transition environment, but that was the environment they were facing. So there was a lot of work to be done to require those, to define those demands, and to look at the legacy pricing models from both sides, which in this case were very different because their consumption pattern was very different for Microsoft. We also had to work through, in this case, all of the internal politics of 2 sides, each sort of jockeying for position through this whole process, which is kind of normal for any M&A environment, but certainly adds some turbulence and some risk to any type of consolidation-based negotiation activity. End result was very high satisfaction with the client. We got them to about a $65 million savings, or 36% cost reduction over the 3-year term of their agreement. So just 3 examples of some of the major Microsoft transactions that we've seen in the past 3 years, and to give you an example of the art of the possible. Back to you, Anne.
Thank you, Bill. Now I'd like to talk to you about preparing for your negotiation with Microsoft. ISG recommends using a best practice approach when preparing to negotiate your Microsoft renewal. You will need a well-prepared Microsoft account team, and your team must have a complete understanding and assessment of these items. Compile your current footprint and licensing entitlements. Create printable personas that vary by their role-based office productivity needs. Develop strategies for unified communications and workgroup collaboration. Develop strategies for mobility, virtual servers, and virtual desktops. Identify any security and privacy issues. Having a comprehensive renewal strategy allows you to lead the conversation with the products that you need, rather than Microsoft's blanket solution. ISG Software Advisory Practice specializes in the following: securing best-in-market terms and conditions through comprehensive agreement analysis and industry benchmarking, including pricing and service levels. We offer compliance assistance and license management in order to be audit-ready. Our engagement model consists of 4 phases: discover, assess, target, execute, culminating in the execution of the new agreement. This illustrates a typical negotiation plan. Evaluate potential credits for values received in your legacy agreement. If we can identify unrealized spend, it may be used in negotiations. Review SA to identify products where a renewal brings no value. Most of the benefit of SA is the right to new version, and it may not make sense to renew when moving to online services. Take the lead in building your own renewal configuration and use the formal kickoff with Microsoft to outline that internal configuration. Make sure that the conversation for establishing the starting price makes sense for online services. The current levels of pricing, A, B, C, and D, with D being the greatest discount with 15,000 or more users, is 30 years old. There are many organizations with 30,000, 40,000, or even 50,000 users, so the pricing needs to work for your organization. This is the typical negotiation scope. You start with a kickoff meeting to understand project goals and objectives and your current Microsoft circumstances. We gather data, including contracts and pricing proposals. We review those proposals and provide an assessment, taking into account the current market comparatives. We deliver and agree upon the negotiation strategy, tactics, timeline, roles, and responsibilities. We execute that plan and identify gaps to goals and objectives. The final deliverables are the complete agreement. A very important first step is data collection. You will need to gather all of this documentation, all volume license agreements, all price sheets, any renewal offers, any net new offers, any audit or compliance notices, basically a full 3-year history. And it's also important to get the contact details for the following needs: Windows Server Administrator, SQL Server Administrator, Email Administrator, Software Assurance Administrator, and Microsoft Online Services Administrator. This illustrates our engagement approach depending on the total project timeline. In forms, we provide information on products, sourcing models, benefits and challenges with the deliverable of a workshop deck. When you provide us the data, we will develop an assessment package and a readiness assessment workshop. Scenarios for licensing, sourcing, and operating models will be reviewed and agreed upon. We will execute the negotiation plan, finalize pricing, and deliver signature-ready contracts. Back to you, Bill.
Thank you very much, Ann. All right, so first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us for the webinar today. I hope that it's been helpful to you. Just as a quick wrap about ISG Software Advisory Practice before we go to Q&A, I hope that it was very clear to the call that our approach to working with our clients is one of really bringing a very deep understanding of your environment and the very deep and unique specifics of each of the major software suppliers, because to get to the right outcome for each of you, it's very much a matter of understanding the pricing methodology, how to construct the right bill of materials, how to define and execute a strong compliance approach, and how to design the solution in an environment that's going to meet not just your current needs, but is going to support your migration to a more fully digital strategy going forward. So thank you for being with us. We would like to make an offer for those of you who would be interested in a pricing assessment. And the first 5 attendees of today's webinar who send an email to Lewis, and Lewis's email address appears on the screen there, will receive a free pricing assessment of their Microsoft deal, and simply reference Microsoft Smart Talk in the subject line, and we'll respond very quickly to that. All right, so with that, we'd like to turn back to Jillian, who will moderate the Q&A. Jillian, back to you.
Thanks, Bill. We do have several audience questions, and if you have any more at this time, now is the time to submit those using the question box on the left side of your window. And our first question is, which cloud includes Windows?
Lewis, I think that one's to you.
Well, in one shape, form, or another, they all include it either directly or indirectly. From a sourcing perspective, the Microsoft Office 365 cloud would, of course, be the cloud that you would source Windows from. But, make no mistake, the Windows client is featured in the other 2 clouds as well. It's just that, on balance, you would source from the Office 365 cloud if that was your chosen mode of deploying the product. There are other licensing agreement options to get Windows client as well, but out of those 3 clouds, Office 365 is the one you would use.
Thanks, Lewis. And our next question, I believe, is for Bill. In your experience, have you seen Microsoft go after additional fees from a client who was allowing a third-party service provider to use the products on site?
Yes, thanks, Jillian. So this really is what's called a right to use issue. And, from a legal perspective, it's a fairly straightforward matter, and it becomes a question of whether those rights exist in the agreement or not. But that's really not the core issue behind whether additional fees can be assessed. And that really becomes much more of a technical question and a software asset management question. We've often seen situations where clients have done a large outsourcing transaction, have assigned certain of their rights or entitlements to a third-party outsourced provider to use under the agreement. We've seen it take several different forms, everything from an asset transfer in some cases to simply where the client retains the agreement with Microsoft, but offers that right to use. And the real question becomes how consistent is the methodology in terms of actually managing and tracking utilization and reconciling it with the entitlements on a regular ongoing basis. So where clients normally get into trouble with this kind of thing, it's where their software asset management capability in-house is inadequate, where they believe they have delegated some software asset management responsibilities to the service provider, but generally there is not a full alignment of the detailed methodology for software asset management or strong alignment in terms of the actual associated service levels and financial risks and penalties associated, because it's perceived in a lot of these traditional agreements as more of an administrative activity. So the answer is yes, we've seen it, and it's a complicated matter, and be very happy to speak to it at greater length. And anyone who'd like a more detailed follow-up, please feel free to just send an email to me or anyone on this call, and we can give you some additional information there.
Thanks, Bill. Great detail there. Next question. How aggressive is MS in going after firms that don't have enough licenses for the installed products? Is this an increasing trend?
Well, I'll go ahead and answer that. And the answer is a bona fide yes. It can be exacerbated if there is some acrimony in the relationship between the trading partners. Microsoft, has compliance revenue as part of its overall performance bogeys at the account level team. So if a customer has a situation which is acute enough, they are probably going to be subject to minimally a software asset management engagement. And depending on how that's arbitrated, it could be resolved then, or it may actually escalate to an audit. So it's part of their overall revenue model, albeit it's the secondary choice to just getting you to use online services and both productivity and security.
Thanks, Louis. Next question for you all. Would these negotiation approaches and processes work for other vendors as well?
Bill, why don't you take that?
Louis, I'm sorry. Please repeat the question, Jillian.
No problem. The question is, would these negotiation approaches and processes work for other vendors as well?
So thank you. Great question. And the answer is the general principles are consistent from supplier to supplier, but the details are very specific to each vendor. So, for example, if you are negotiating for S/4HANA, you're going to take a different approach to looking for any availability of credits. You're going to take a different approach to looking at issues around subjects such as digital access versus traditional user-based licenses. In the case of Oracle, there's an issue called availability for use. You also get into the fact that Oracle has acquired so many other companies over time that most of our clients have a real hodgepodge of existing agreements and entitlements with very little consistency, and often just because of the age and number of agreements, very inconsistent understanding of their entitlements and tracking of utilization. So in the case of Oracle, you might look very much at how to optimize your deployment of licenses across servers and users and how to jigger that around to use a non-technical term, to really reduce the overall demand on entitlements and then give you some additional leverage. So, we could go on, but again, it's a very specific knowledge of the technical environment and the historical context and the licensing nuances of each of the ISVs that becomes really imperative if you're going to maximize the value to your organization. And that's really why we at ISG have chosen to focus on the largest, most significant software vendors who work with most of our clients, because that's how we can bring the most positive impact to our clients.
All right, thank you, Bill. Next question we have. Office was free with MSDN. Office 365 does not allow for free dev licenses. Have you seen anyone successfully negotiate free Office 365 for dev/testing?
Yes, Office, well, there is Office, the traditional MSI version of Office, and then there's Office 365 Pro Plus, which is a click-to-run version. MSDN is still the subscription requirement in order to have Office instances available for dev and test. There are some specific rules that deal with developer users and being able to use that instance of Office for production as well as dev test, but you probably want to make sure that you have a very open and transparent conversation with Microsoft as to what your intentions are with respect to dev software titles, and to make sure you don't run into any unintended headwinds. It is a service. It is not a finished good anymore, so there are some differences, but still MSDN is the vehicle that you would need to use as a licensed subscription in order to access software for dev and test.
Okay, great. And our next question is, Microsoft is keen on renewing our EA over 5 years instead of 3. What pluses and minuses do you see in doing so?
The biggest plus is at least predictability in terms of what Microsoft will charge for the services that are covered under this term. This is one of Microsoft's problems with many customers, is that it lacks predictability, and we see that take place at renewals, where customers may have had some aggressive discounting at the start of that term. The renewal comes along. Basically, customer simply wants to retain the service levels it had. There's no plans to increase. And in many cases, customers are seeing immediate 30+% price increases. So a 5-year term just gives you 24 months of potential pricing predictability. But I would also add to what is the inventory of software that's being covered at. I would look at that more closely in order to sort of say, listen, I think you may have some better options after 36 months, depending on what it is you're licensing in that particular agreement. But overall, the biggest single benefit is predictability in pricing.
Okay, thanks again, Louis. Our next question is, does ISG use Microsoft products for its business? And has the ISG software advisory practice been involved in the negotiations?
The answer is yes and yes. I actually negotiated our agreement on behalf of ISG. So the answer is yes. We use a lot of Microsoft technology. I think we are clearly Microsoft 365 E3 customers, and we use Microsoft Teams as a source of collaboration. So these are things that we know and we work with ourselves, and oftentimes can comment with customers who are making inquiries as to what is our experience with these same products.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, and that is, when renewing the MS Premier support agreement, would you consider there is a chance in 2020 to not move to Unified, or is this inevitable?
Well, it is inevitable. What could delay it is who you are. There are some customers whose scale and whose marquee value to Microsoft is critical. And some customers who, once they get a unified support proposal, the numbers are just completely unreasonable compared to the historical spend. I don't know that there's any more than one bite of the apple left for anybody, and for those who can take the bite of the apple, there are going to have to be some pretty compelling circumstances for Microsoft to grandfather yet another annual contract for Premier when there's no more Premier quota. They have unified support quota, so that's really the headwinds that you're running into with the account team.